Misinformation can result in dire consequences. Disclaimer: everything in this video is completely alleged, in Minecraft, not in real life, and for entertainment purposes only. The individual talked about in today's video is anonymous, and therefore I have no proof of anything talked about in this video, all alleged. I do have my email open for anyone who was interested in sharing their personal stories, and I received one email about someone who was directly influenced by DissociaDID's videos. In this video, we'll be talking about the dangers of misguided advice and the impact it had on this anonymous individual's mental health. The purpose of DissociaDID's channel is to educate about dissociative identity disorder for many individuals seeking understanding and guidance, and for this individual who is trying to understand their own experiences led them down a dangerous path. Trying to comprehend their inner world led to a whole spiral of confusion. This individual found a narrative that didn't align with their truth, and it led to a path of self-destruction. The aim of this person sharing their story is to help others seek the truth and go through reliable sources. Once again, thank you so much for trusting me to share your story with everyone, and let's get into the video. DissociaDID's content and a misinformed friend nearly cost me my life. I will refer to DissociaDID/Kaya with she, her, considering she goes by all pronouns, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong. I was diagnosed with PTSD, technically PTSD in children 6 years and younger. The DSM-5 doesn't have CPTSD. In 2021, and I am currently in therapy for DID. The story I'm about to share takes place back in 2019, when both those things were still undiagnosed. I was aware of my alters, but I was living in a constant state of fear and denial. This state of denial caused me to refrain from learning about the condition, because I thought if I stopped giving attention to my problems, they'd go away. Disclaimer, they did not. And as a result, I was very naive and impressionable despite being an adult. My symptoms were definitely life disrupted, and I had little memory of my early childhood and had spent most of my teenage years living in some sort of daze, but I was functional. My symptoms were manageable, and most switches, those that I'm aware of at least, would only happen if I was triggered. So overall, I would say that my symptoms were manageable before. In 2019, I discovered that all it took to turn something manageable into a complete intangible disaster was an enabler. And that enabler would be a friend of mine who I will call Jay. My already terrible mental health symptoms had become quite overwhelming, and I began finding it harder and harder to function in everyday life. I shared these symptoms with Jay, who approached this in a very peculiar way. I refer to what I now know as alters as imaginary people I have in the back of my head that influence my thoughts and actions, and sometimes it even feels like they shove me aside. Back then, the switches were either non-existent or were covered by amnesia, I don't know, but either way, I mostly experienced alters co-consciously. But Jay immediately began talking about wanting to meet them, which I found extremely weird. He was talking about them as if they were their own people. Mind you, I knew little to nothing about what exactly I was experiencing. Jay asked about their names, their personalities, and the roles I believed they have. It was also oddly specific and confused me so much. Like, fuck if I know or care what roles some creature that brainwashes and controls me takes on. The role of making me want to unalive myself? After a long conversation of beating around the bush, he finally opened up to where he learned all of this. Yup, you guessed it, DissociaDID and DID communities on Discord. He explained to me that what I experienced was called DID/OSDD. Thanks for diagnosing me over Discord, Jay, you beat my therapist to it. And he explained that these people are called alters. He made sure to let me know that his DMs were a safe place for those alters and invited me to Discord servers that were full of fakers and misinformation, without realizing that by doing so, he opened the gates to a flood of unimaginable mental torture. I guess this enabled something within myself, because as a result, I suddenly started experiencing long, full-blown blackouts, which I didn't remember having before. According to people in my life, I was allegedly, as I couldn't recall it afterwards, displaying bipolar behavior, and people were worried about me. Even a coworker pointed out that I was behaving strangely during staff lunch. This had never happened before. It had never stood out before. It was almost as if my symptoms switched from covert to overt within the span of a few months. But I kept trying to follow Jay's, DissociaDID's, advice, and I felt like my alters were also, to a certain extent, trying to copy the way DissociaDID's alters presented themselves to the world, but I really can't speak for them. But I know that I did. I desperately tried to pretend there was an inner world where there was none. I tried to force switches on camera so I could watch back and validate myself by comparing them to DissociaDIDs. They were nothing like them because an outsider can't even notice them in my case. I kept trying to make sure I was a functional system that was a bunch of smiles and sunshine, even though I was far from that, and anything to do with my alters nauseated me and made me want to blow my brains out. It wasn't fun and quirky, it felt like possession, and it was negatively impacting every aspect of life. They were not friends, they were a trauma response. But for the part above, I cannot blame Jay nor DissociaDID. No one was to blame for the way my brain reacted to coming up to someone for the first time in my life. But for the next part, I definitely can blame both. Because whenever I protested or expressed any discomfort with these new experiences, Jay would keep addressing the issue of me not considering them to be separate people and claimed that I was harming them by considering them as part of myself, and acted like I was being a cunt towards real people instead of parts of myself. I still struggle to view them as more than that to this day. I wasn't even talking to them, I was only talking about them. In the meantime, I also started watching DissociaDID's content to try to learn more about how to treat my alters properly and how to learn to communicate. Jay and DissociaDID both made me believe this was how it was supposed to be. They were entitled to their own lives. Jay knew what he was talking about because DissociaDID was an expert and she knew what was best for me. But obviously, that was super far from the truth. It was hurting me and it made me open up about my condition to people who were never supposed to know and would abuse that disadvantage by asking an alter things I didn't want to answer myself, or cut me off / respond to me with memes making fun of fakers. Most of the time, I didn't know who I was, where I was, or even who my own reflection was. I couldn't get through a single day without blacking out or having a mental breakdown. My boss was upset with my low performance. All my days would blend into one, and at one point, the stress of all this combined caused me to fall physically ill to the point where I lost nearly 10 kilograms within a month or two. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. I was spiraling out of control. I was a shell of who I once was, while Jay would happily interact with what was killing me inside like he was doing them a favor. He acted like he cared more about them than he did about me. It was always my name and co, my name and friends. I no longer existed to him. After all, they quote unquote weren't parts of a whole. In what fucking world, Jay? So I was just going to have to learn to love them or else I was a bad person, right? I tried to do exactly what DissociaDID and her minions were telling me to do, which some went along with it and some didn't. I was a complete train wreck and the thought of unaliving was constantly in my mind, to the point where I got dangerously close to actually carrying it out. It wouldn't be fair to pin this all on DissociaDID, and maybe Jay was more to blame than she was, but I do blame her for claiming to be a mental health advocate who knew what she was talking about, when she really didn't. Her content is heavily anti-recovery and harmful for other fragile and impressionable people with undiagnosed mental conditions, who are in need of a real professional instead of a con artist. Whenever I tell people about my condition, I am terrified that DissociaDID's channel is the first thing they stumble upon when they look up DID. This whole experience left me terrified of whoever I opened up to, even if they're close friends, might be misinformed and will talk to a more naive alter into doing harmful things. The whole TikTok faker culture that also partially stemmed from DissociaDID's content kept me from seeking help for years because I was scared that my therapist would view me as one of them and wouldn't believe me. I'm not really sure where I was going with this story altogether, but I just think it's important for everyone who has fallen victim to DissociaDID's misinformation / faking culture to share their story. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this person's story. If you resonated with anything they talked about, you are not alone. If you're struggling with your mental health or have been affected by similar experiences, there is help out there. Everybody's journey is unique, so it's important to seek the help of a professional that can help to tailor your personal needs. If you or someone you know is in crisis, please don't hesitate to call the National Prevention Hotline. It is available 24/7. If you've been impacted by similar experiences or have your own story to share, feel free to comment below. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up. Thank you so much for being a part of this important conversation, and peace out.